It was about your mom will pay you, you pay your mom. It was about pay. It was about if he, trading and equal this, that, and the other. But there was still a level of we got to still be in control.
Yes.
And I think that's something.
That's why, you see, that's why we're not trying to use the term the 3 stages of slavery. We're focusing on the concept of domination and control, in which legalized slavery is the first phase. Okay? The domination and control, as you'll see, doesn't change.
Right.
The form through which it's operated changes. Okay? There were disagreements about what the proper way to maintain domination and control ought to be. Okay? There are disagreements about that.
So there was levels of slavery is wrong.
But control is okay.
But control is okay.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
And we're trying to develop an understanding of the capacity of people to transform and change the way in which they do things without changing their vision of what the objective is, and that we need to understand that so that we don't get thrown off the trail by the way in which language is utilized to confuse and to distract. Okay? Or to trying to cut below the language game and not get caught up in terminology, but trying to look at the substance of what was going on. Okay? So in 1868, the problem was that whites continued to deny fundamental rights to blacks on the grounds that they were not citizens of the states in which they lived. And that was especially important with regard to access to the political process. So you're not a citizen, you can't vote, you can't register to vote, you can't vote, you can't run for office, and so on. You can't be this, you can't do that, you're not a citizen.
And up until that point, it was still the concept that it was blacks were three blacks equal one white. Yeah, up until that point, to this point.
Yeah, that's really still there in the Constitution, that's right.
Because my thing was this right here. According to the preamble of the Constitution, we declare that all people are created equal. You know what I'm saying?
No, we didn't. Doesn't say that in the Constitution. It says that in the Declaration of Independence.
Declaration, okay, Declaration of Independence, whichever.
Yeah.
But okay, it's a host.
But, well, it's what?
It's a host.
Well, it's not even, it's not that, because the Constitution is clear that the people, when it says we the people, they're only referring to whites.
That's what I'm saying.
But that's expressed in the Constitution, because blacks are defined as 3/5 of a person.
Because I'm applaud because in 1776 it said that we have an independence. And we still celebrate that day today as an Independence Day, but then up until 1865, and then still now, you really not consider as being whole.
That's right.
So I'm saying how, and then I'm just finding out in 1995 the legislature ratified the 13th Amendment, but I'm just saying, I try not to think about it, but then again it does come up, and it really is upsetting.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
And it should be.
I'm saying it really goes beyond upsetting. I can use another word for it. It really pissed me off.
Yeah.
And I'm saying we as a race of people have fought for so long and has been in the struggle for so long, and it's still like every step that you make, they take 2 or 3 steps ahead. And I'm saying, at what point is this going to stop? And it makes me say that, it's saying, well, yeah, you're going to get your just reward when you get to the other land. But I'm saying, I want mine now.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. But that's why we're doing this work. But we can't answer as if there was some
Yeah.
way to snap
and
your
then
fingers and here's the
I
answer.
understand the importance of raising our kids, to have them given a knowledge that's good to young people to hear, because at some point the cycle has to be broken. And it is not with these kids and their kids and the generation to come in order to make life better for them. That's what it's all about to me. I'm saying, you know, you got to break the cycle. You got to put it somewhere.
If you look at the pattern, you will see that in an evolutionary way, each time you're engaging in struggle at a different place. There have been changes. Okay? The fundamental problems remain, but you're fighting them at a different level, in a different way. What?
Right.
What?
You mean to tell me that we
Still there. Still there.
still got some laws on the books saying that we're not?
Because they
No,
never.
no, wait a minute now. Johnny's question was, prior to 1868, okay, and then we all got on this trail. Now, we haven't gotten to 1868 yet, and then that law is going to disappear.
About the one, what?
3/5.
3/5.
Yeah, because that's what happens here in 1868. The remedy is that in 1868, the 14th Amendment is passed, which grants dual citizenship to every person regardless of race, so that you become, black people as well as white people become citizens of the United States. That's one citizenship. Everyone becomes a citizen of the whole country. And you become a citizen of the state in which you reside. We have a federal government which has two kinds of government. You have a national government and you have a state government. And every person is a citizen of the federal government and is a citizen of the particular state in which they live.
Right.
And that dual citizenship wipes out the 3/5 provision of the Constitution. What?
I mean, it's fine as you said, but still this person, and we wasn't considered as persons,
No.
was property.
No, that's what changes here. In the 13th Amendment, you abolish slavery. Nobody is property anymore. It's not supposed to be. Talking about what the amendment is intended to do. Nobody's property anymore. Everybody's a person. Now, in the 14th Amendment, every person becomes a citizen of the United States, regardless of race. It becomes a citizen of the state in which they reside, regardless of race. Okay? And what the whites were trying to do in the black codes was to create a form of control which sucked the life out of the 13th Amendment and of the 14th Amendment. Okay? There's a struggle going on. There's a tension. There's a fight for control of the situation. And the federal government is making moves, and the state legislature is making moves. Okay? Both sides are moving to try to control the outcome, right? So, in 1870, we still have a problem. Whites are still denying blacks the right to vote and access to the political process. Their position is the fact that you became a citizen doesn't guarantee you the right to vote. Okay, we got to take the next step then. That's where the 15th Amendment comes in 1870. That's the Voting Rights Amendment, or what we call the 15th Amendment, guarantee of the right to vote. Now that's supposed to, between these three amendments, that was supposed to have resolved the creation of the package necessary to put whites and blacks on the same basis. They use the word supposed. Okay? Supposed to create a level playing field. Right? Now, from the black community's point of view, one of the key deprivations in this whole process was education. Reading, writing, arithmetic, mathematics, science, geography, philosophy, architecture, medicine, and so on. And I'm stressing certain words here because one of the key goals in slavery was to destroy the black community, right? But it was the black community that was successful in working together with allies in the white community to create the first public education system in Mississippi. And it was based in the churches. Those were the venues or the places where these schools were set up. That was true all over the South after the Civil War. So, and the reason I'm stressing that is because you remember the tension over what role the church was going to play. Was it going to be a place for controlling people and keeping them down? Or was it an opportunity to create a basis for community through which struggle could be engaged in order to make progress? Okay? Now, interestingly, and what I've been reading very recently, is that the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a bureau of the United States government that came into being after the Civil War, did an enormous amount of documentation of this struggle around the creation of education, especially public education, in the Deep South states. And that there was enormous energy that was released in the black community, an intense interest in education. Not just education to create menial labor jobs, but the full range of education in the liberal arts in order to prepare people for the full range of kinds of things that people could do with their skills in town.
This is national.
What?
This is national.
This is all over the South after the Civil War. Okay. Interestingly,
Who had access to that?
I don't know who had access to it. I know that it's been researched and people are now writing about
And it was done by the free.
Freedmen's Bureau.
So it makes me think from just hearing that, and maybe I may be thinking about, but if somebody did that study right after the Civil War, and then we came into public education being based in churches, they were still planning, and it was being pushed to be based in churches to keep the control of it. Because you were still isolated, because each plantation had its own churches. And that still gave, if the study was out there to show that you that black people wanted to have access to all of the education, and white community didn't want them to have any education, so therefore they still wanted to control it, then that was why they moved to push or supported the effort to put it in the church.
I don't think that's accurate from what I'm reading. Okay? Because first of all, the planners didn't want the education system at all. And the poor whites didn't participate in it at all. And not every church was involved in it. There were certain churches which had a history and an interest in the education process and became involved in it. Some of the churches did a better job than others, and a real struggle unfolded around control of those schools. But it's not why they went there in the first place. I think they went there in the first place because they were probably the only community buildings available in which to house the school. Because there was no system of schools, period, for the black community. And so you found community institutions in which you could house them. Now, the ensuing struggle over what that education should look like over the next 30 years is a whole other discussion. What's significant is that you had no education allowed by law. And the real push came from the black community, not from the white community. And that put the lie to two things, which has always been said about the black community. One, that they weren't interested in it and weren't capable of engaging in political process. And two, that they had no interest in education. They were basically mentally lazy, and they were good for menial labor, and that's it. And that wasn't true. That was imposed on the community by force and violence and by law. But the evidence is that immediately after slavery, during this period of Reconstruction, there was more interest in education in the black community than there was in the white community. That's a tough pill for the white community to swallow. But the historical evidence supports that conclusion based on the studies that were done during that period of time. There was an intense interest in a complete education process.
I can see why that was.
What?
I think because the blacks had a greater need for seeking education at that point over the whites, because they had been denied the right.
Right. But you know, poor whites did too. They really have any education either. They needed it, but the interest wasn't there.
They speak, but they weren't heard. Poor all everywhere. They speak, they make it known, but it don't get to the point where the masses of people are knowledgeable. If they are knowledgeable of that one, they don't reveal it.
The last one on here is that in South Carolina, you elected the only majority black legislature during that period of time. But that demonstrates the keen interest that existed immediately in the political process. Everywhere blacks were elected to legislatures, but South Carolina is the only state that had a majority black legislature during Reconstruction.
I think that some of the dynamics of the state of South Carolina had a lot to do with that too. Because the plight of black folk in Mississippi and in South Carolina was a little bit different. And in their rural communities, and a lot of the rural communities in South Carolina, they've always been white folk that live close by black folk. But I do know that from my experience in Mississippi, I don't care how cool you was, white folk and black folk didn't live around the same place at all.
I would disagree with that.
That's not.
I think I would disagree with that because
What's she saying?
where I was brought up, you know, they lived near, and even some of the children played. But yes, because we lived on their farm,
Oh, in the
What
rural.
was the
in the
statement?
rural,
What was
in
the
the
statement?
city.
I didn't hear.
There was, he said that the first, the push for, that there were more blacks elected in the legislature in South Carolina. And I said, I think that the climate was a bit different in South Carolina than it was in Mississippi. I really think that there was a different climate. And I based that on the memory of the people that I've met since I lived in the state of South Carolina. It was basically on that premise.
Now, what I was saying about living, they lived together, you know, but they didn't associate, they didn't visit, you know, they didn't go to one another's house.
See, and where I was brought
They
up,
didn't communicate.
there wasn't no white folk, no black folk.
Well, you come up in the city.
In Harrisburg, there was total separation. Poor white folk did not live around poor black folk. White folk and black folk were totally separate. We lived a lifestyle where I know the black kids that I grew up with had no contact with white people unless they went to town or somebody worked in a white person's house. Other than that, their lives were totally separate.
Was he in the area with the Curie College, the college in Harrisburg? The college in Harrisburg, not USM, the other one in South.
Can we bring this to halt right
Yeah,
now?
that was not
The food is ready. We're gonna stop now,
here.
and we need to just move the get everybody's help to move the tables out, and put the chairs around, 3 on each side and 2 on the ends. And we go up and get the food, and we can resume at 1:30, okay? We'll finish up this part and go into the small group work. Okay. Can we work together on this? please take it up so we can move the tables out and people can begin to read, because people have their books and other stuff on them. And we can share them.
While Mike is preparing to finish up this morning, and I haven't had any conversation with any of you about a culture sharing later on this week, but one of the things that I was thinking yesterday is Drew here. After Drew finished talking, and she was talking about having all this information and knowing all this information, and how, she has all of this on the inside of her. Yes, we do know this information. Some of us do know this information, but others of us don't. And then today during lunch, we were talking about heritage and race and that kind of thing. So I thought last night as I was riding around, I went to community, I thought, it would be a good thing. Sometimes we really do have to stop and look at where we've come from. So, in that effort, I'm asking Lionel to draw us a big tree. And from that tree, we're going to put branches. And this week, as we're here, one of the things that I want us to do is to maybe put pieces of our families on that tree, and then think about your family historically, maybe where your family comes from, your great-grandmother, your great-grandfather, if you know that information. And then talk about when they were born and what was happening in the world when they were born. And try to write something positive about your ancestry, because the reason that you are here is something that is innate, something that is in you, that is God-given. So if it is in you, then it is also in your ancestors. So the reason that you've heard the voice to struggle is probably because ancestrally, if you look at where you come from, your people have been people who have struggled. Whether they've been landowners, they may have been born into slavery, but think about where your folk came from, and then try to write something positive. So we're going to hang up this sheet, and over the week, look on there and find a branch and write something positive about your ancestors. And at the end of the week, we'll talk about that. Talk about your great-grandfather, that person's name, what you may call them, and the year that they were born, if you can recall. If you've ever done any family research, and you know where you're from, not saying that we can trace it all the way back, but there are some things that we can trace. So as you're here this week spending time, participate in that tree, okay? So it'll be hanging on the wall somewhere here on the floor somewhere, okay? Thank you.
Second stage, part 2. From the white point of view. Okay? In the 1870s, the southern states are readmitted to the United States, to the Union, to become part of Congress, become part of national legislature again. The southern states begin to put pressure on the federal government to lose interest in protecting the federally created rights for blacks in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Now, from the white point of view, they have needs, they have problems. Blacks are thinking and acting as if they are free. Whoa. They get land. They are deciding for themselves if and where they want to or are going to work. They're negotiating their wages. They're moving about without loyalty to their former owners or to anyone. Whoa. Right? They're trying to vote. running for office, engaging in business. But we got to go back to the original vision for whites, which is that they want cheap labor so they can maximize profits and minimize risks in the big investments that they've made in their land holdings. Now, this process has grown out of the Reconstruction period after the 1866 Civil Rights Act and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and the push for education, because blacks moved quickly to try to tear down the last vestiges of the slave system. And whites do not want to give that up. So one of their remedies in the early stages was to create the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, in order to have a secret society through which they could use force and violence to terrorize the black community and attempt to intimidate people or punish them for trying to do any or all of these things and much more. It was the use of force and violence to try to accomplish what they had difficulty accomplishing during this period because of the set of laws that had been created, constitutional amendments, and because of the presence of federal troops in the southern states that were attempting to enforce the new rights which blacks had gained. Okay? Second problem, therefore, was that the federal troops were still in the South to protect blacks, enforce rights, and limit the capacity of whites to exploit the black population, which is the same problem here, really. Okay? Similar, two parts of the same problem. So the remedy for the whites was what was called the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. In the election of 1876, the election was so close between the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate, one of which was Rutherford B. Hayes, and the other one was a guy named Tilden. Tilden was a Democrat, Hayes was a Republican. The election got thrown into the House of Representatives in the United States Congress for a decision. But before a decision could be made, because they had to investigate the elections in 3 different states where there were contests about the integrity of the election process, before they could decide that election, a compromise was reached between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats, who were the Southerners, basically, the Republicans, who were the Northerners, basically, reached the following negotiated settlement. Negotiated. Andy, you were asking about negotiations and who can participate. This was a whole country through their 2 political parties, 2 main political parties, Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats said, we will let you win. You can have the presidency of the United States. You can have that. We'll give it to you. And therefore, you can have your way with how you want to expand into the West, which was partly what was at stake, this policy of westward expansion beyond the Mississippi River. But we want something in exchange. This is the deal. You take your federal troops out of the South, and you leave us alone to deal with black folks the way we want to. We'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. And they struck that deal. And that's how Rutherford B. Hayes became the Republican president in 1876. The deal wasn't struck till 1877. And the federal troops were removed, and the whites using the KKK to systematically begin to drive blacks from any political office, then had control of the state legislatures to do what they wanted to do. And of course, local government as well, on the county level and on the town level. That was the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. Okay? So now look at each of the arenas in which the whites were working. They worked in the private arena through a paramilitary organization, what you might call today a militia, right? But then it was called the KKK. And it's not an accident that so many of these militia today have their roots in the KKK. The KKK knows that its name has become poisoned publicly and is a negative, so they don't use KKK so much anymore. They use other fronts to accomplish the same result. So they moved in the private sector through the KKK, and they moved in the military sector to remove the troops, the governmental level, right, on the national level. So we need to understand, the Republicans knew exactly what the deal was. This hands-off policy in the South was not a regional policy. Just like slavery became a national policy, this hands-off policy to lead the white Democrats to take control of every aspect of life in the South was a function of national policy. And the Republicans got their economic expansion into the West and their railroads on the backs of the black community. Black community got sold out, those are the two words, sold out by their Republican friends. Where's Jerome? He's coming. He's not yet. Jerome raised this question. We were talking about this over lunch. He raised this question earlier, if you remember, when we were talking about I think we're talking about this period, the 1866 Civil Rights Act and the 14th Amendment and so on. He said, so those Republicans, those were good guys. And you remember I hesitated and said some were better than others, right? When we do this critical analysis, we have got to get away from this ingrained need, tendency, instinct to make a threshold choice about whether people are good folks or bad folks, good guys or bad guys, good white folks or bad white folks, good black folks or bad black folks. It doesn't work that way. At any given moment, a person may be your ally and doing something that is in your best interest. But that doesn't mean tomorrow that what they want to do is in your best interest. And we have to be disciplined. We have to be crystal clear in our mind about what's going down. These radical Republicans, first and foremost, were not about the guaranteeing and protection of black rights. There was a moment in time during which the interests of blacks and the interests of some whites came together in this process. And just as sure as it came together like railroad tracks, or Highway 49, you know, and some other road, for a period of time, they also began to verge. They had other fish to fry, other things that became more important to them, and they were quite ready to sell out, and they did. Purists, and we need to understand that. Okay? It's less important for me to know whether someone's a good person or a bad person than what they will commit to doing. Am I making an assessment about whether that's in my interest or my community's interest? Okay, so the sellout came here. Now, that was only a part of the puzzle, okay? Because as part of this picture that the whites were trying to put together, they needed to establish a system of racial segregation as the second stage of domination and control to substitute for slavery. but to have the same effect of stigmatizing the race with the stamp of inferiority. Well, wait a minute now. All of those, take out the word segregation, put in the word slavery, take out second stage, put in first stage, you got the same thing. Right? We're selling the same car. Call it an Oldsmobile. You know, we call it a Plymouth, we call it a, what's the other one they make? Chrysler. No, not Chrysler. Plymouth and Dodge. You know, they got different grills on their vans, but it's the same car, just with a different name on it, different grill. Right? A little different change in what we're going to call it. Now, in its essence, whether you're talking about slavery or you're talking about segregation, force and violence was an integral part of it, but whites always need to have a moral justification, an attitude of righteousness. And part of the way they accomplish this culturally is to create a legal system surrounding it, and then they say, look, the rule of law is what's important in any civilized society. We have to follow the law. So if you don't like it, change the law. Don't matter that you've been totally excluded from the political process, so you can't change the law, right? You following me? We together on this? So they need to create the trappings of justification, of legitimacy, of righteousness, and they do that in the legal system. So, in 1877, the same year as the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, right, where you're removing the federal troops to unleash the forces of the white community to regain domination and control, the United States Supreme Court, which of course is made up completely of whites, right, decides what were called a package of cases that were called, of all things, the civil rights cases, which should have been called the uncivil rights cases, okay, in which they said the 14th Amendment, remember the 14th Amendment? Provided citizenship, provided equal protection clause, provided the due process clause. Okay, here comes the Supreme Court and begins to take a knife and carving away its basic protections. And this is how they did it. They don't do it all at once, see? They slide from point to point. They said the equal protection clause does not apply to acts of individuals, only to the acts of public officials, what we call state action, thereby limiting the impact of the 14th Amendment and opening the door to widespread legal discrimination. And the Supreme Court ignores the 13th Amendment, which no one has ever disputed applies to the acts of individuals, which they could have used to decide the case, but they have elected not to, and have elected not to almost since that time. Very, very few cases which they've ever allowed the 13th Amendment to function, one of which was the 1968 fair housing case, but that's the exception. Now, what does this open the door to? Most of your contact in the business world is not with the government, it's with the private individual, especially back in the 1870s. So what they're saying is the 14th Amendment does not apply to job discrimination. 14th Amendment doesn't apply to housing discrimination. 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the act of any individual who seeks to terrorize or intimidate you out of exercising your rights. Whoa! What are they opening the door to? They say you cannot bring an action against the Ku Klux Klan or any of its members for attempting to prevent you from exercising your right, not under the 14th Amendment. Okay? Pretty major piece of business, right? But they're not finished. This case was about public facilities, by the way. So they opened the door to segregation in every public. What's a public facility? Your downtown store, right? Your cotton gin, right? Any place of business, any hotel, any place of transportation, train. Well, they didn't have buses, but stagecoach, right? And so forth, right? Okay. Now, we need to exclude blacks from politics and from voting, right? Where is that guaranteed? 1868 in the 14th Amendment, 1870 in the 15th Amendment, and of course all of this was a badge and indicia of slavery under the 13th Amendment to be excluded from politics. So what's the remedy? Here's where Mississippi takes the lead for the nation. And they developed what's called the Mississippi Plan of 1890, which was designed, which was conceived, which is in its essence, its intent was to figure out how to exclude blacks from the right to vote, registration to vote, participation in the political process in any way, without ever saying blacks don't have the right to vote, which was guaranteed by the 15th Amendment. Okay? And you do that by creating literacy tests and by creating poll taxes and other devices which were copied all over the South. By 1910, every southern state came to participate in this process, which is called the Mississippi Plan. And they accomplished it in Mississippi by holding a constitutional convention at which only one black person was allowed to come, which was never ratified by the people, and which is still the Constitution of Mississippi. It was what we call a coup, basically. A bunch of white folks got together, ramrodded it through, and then basically threatened everybody to live with it, okay? So they put the legal stamp on this process, okay? Now, we're not finished. We've got blacks vulnerable to the acts of private individuals. Those rights have been stripped away. Blacks have been excluded from the political process, or are about to be. But now we want to complete the process. We want to authorize governments and public officials to engage in the same kind of racial segregation. So in 1896, the United States Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson makes that decision. It says the 14th Amendment does not prohibit the creation of segregation or segregation laws by the government or regulations created by government. Segregation in public facilities are okay. And again, the Supreme Court ignores the 13th Amendment. Right? All of this opens the door to what happens in the next 75 years. The need was to create total segregation and control of the black community from the 1870s to the 1970s. So we had laws which are now authorized by Plessy versus Ferguson to prevent blacks from registering to vote, from sitting on grand juries and petty juries. That means no blacks in any trials. No black can sit on the juries in a trial. No blacks can sit on a jury which brings indictments. Okay? Blacks were prevented as a practical matter from being witnesses against white people in court. And established by law segregation in public schools, public facilities, political primaries, housing, jobs, churches. And they made it a crime to assemble, or to assemble in mixed groups of blacks and whites, or to provide, or to advocate an end to racial segregation. Many states had what were called sedition laws. Sedition is about attempting to overthrow the government by force and violence, which is tantamount to treason. Okay? So it was treason. It was an attempt to overthrow the government, to advocate the end to racial segregation. And they were applying those laws in the 1960s. Right here in Mississippi, and all over the Deep South. Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and undoubtedly in South Carolina. Okay? So, that is the historical process at this point. You want to say something?
I just want to say that one of the things that we found out in the early 60s was that the literacy test really wasn't about literacy. It was It was about having a system by which they could justify them maintaining the control and dominating. And why was it not about literacy? Because we found out here in Mississippi that there were people that had 4th, 5th, and 6th grade education that was saying to teachers, college graduates, law students, doctors, that you don't know how to interpret a section of the Constitution of Mississippi. So they were saying, people with 4th and 5th grade education were saying to these people, you are still illiterate. The truth of the matter is that the power to deny was in the hands of the person that took that position, strictly in their hands. They knew that we didn't have access to the legal system or the political system to challenge this system. So therefore, it continuously perpetuated itself and went on and on and on. I just wanted to bring those points out because a lot of times, especially when you hear folks talk about this period, they talk about how black folks in the South could not become registered voters because they could not pass a literacy test. So just wanted to know that literacy test really wasn't about determining whether someone was illiterate or literate. It was about making sure that it gave the impression of, but it simply gave the power to approve or disapprove to whoever it was in those positions. And in most cases, it was in the hands of the white men.
Okay. We're back in our other ego structure. Right? We're all white folks again. Okay? So there we go. And we're going to break up into the same groups, 1, 2, and 3. And we need to put together our vision, strategy, and program of work about how to maintain this second stage, create and maintain the second stage of domination and control, so that we can have a system of racial segregation that will enable us to exploit the labor of the black community and basically put them back in the same dependent status, stigmatized by race, as they were in the first stage of domination and control. Okay? Are we clear on what the task is? No?
Would you repeat it?
You're sure, but you want me to repeat it just for the sake of it, right?
I think I'm sure.
Okay. Pick up her feet, won't you? Okay, we're working now. We'll work later from the black point of view, but we're going to work now from the white point of view during the second stage from the 1860s to the 1970s. Okay, we're covering a big range of time. It's actually a shorter range of time than the first stage, right? We need to create and maintain a system of racial segregation to substitute for the system of slavery so that we can be true to our core vision of domination and control of the black community so as to be able to exploit their labor, maximize our profits, and minimize our risks. What do we need to do how do we need to do it, right? We want to put this together. We want to understand the depth and breadth of where white folks are coming from so we can fully understand our opponent in this process, right? We need to understand how they work.
Because you're not.
What?
I said it should be a little bit more quick to. Oh, because we're not too far from it now.
That's right.
In terms of.
Some of us open up to.
But that was good. That was Thursday. That was tomorrow. You guys were crazy. Yeah, I thought you had been. You know, I ain't confused.
Y'all keep coming out further and further. We try to get everybody in. So our young people won't left out.
Don't pulling us out.
Like it's somebody new.
We do have about 3 or 4 minutes to see first of all. We've got an Ella.
There's no young person or something.
No young people.
When they coming back on? They coming back.
Be back sometime.
It depends on what part.
Ready?
Brookline.
Well, put this nigga back in his place.
Because they get out of it.
They had a vision of freedom. Back on our side.
We got to put them in.
You ain't gotta worry about being a freedom. You gotta worry about this. I remember some of the
Or have a barbecue. I heard two ladies.
It's all right, the missionary is, and everybody barbecue, grease all over the white room. They going afros, and won't come in there.
Everybody want to come to the
We got to get them back in there.
but we want to keep control. Even though we're going to allow them
The 1860s
certain
to
things, we want to make sure we still.
established our position of control. The point of 1600 to 1800.
Right, the slavery is not legal anymore, but we still want to run it in control. Right, so they made it in because they, organized, so we got to get to fight against certain rights, and we want to still control. But they gave them all they kept
You know what people we need to do, right?
even though they were free.
1860.
was not free. They didn't know.
That's the law against some of the laws. You have to, yeah, with the police system. But it's about the legal system. Really, it favors them.
What y'all hear say? Okay.
I didn't say next year we talking about it. We're taking them right now and discussing it. What's the business? Maintain non-legislation control of African Americans. What's in the version?
Well, they got some laws that favor them now. Do you have to recognize those laws?
Yeah. That all should be part of our plan, to try to combat them and set them up. Right.
How do you get the laws to work out?
How to take the law in.
But they're in our business.
No, they're gonna be our business, they're gonna try to use the law.
But what's our shit right now? Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Why are we together? Right. So why are we together? What are we trying to do?
We're trying to get the niggas back.
Back because we wanted slaves, right? Having slaves, but now they ain't slaves no more. They allowed them to abolish that. So we gotta recognize the law now. And so they ain't slaves, but we still, what do we want to do now? The law just say we gotta abolish slaves. Law said they citizens now. Law grants us equal protection due process. Okay, law gives them the right to vote, so they got the law under control before because they have no political power. So now we're
maintain control and
Sometimes we're gonna have to reestablish, maybe even.
maintain and reestablish control over African Americans.
Oh, that's definitely.
we want to maintain domination and control over African Americans. That's what it's about, us having power, us being superior, us being able to dominate and control.
Okay, you got the vision suites.
Right? Maintain domination and control over African Americans. You can you write a little smaller or you can write big?
And control after laws
Over African Americans.
over African Americans who have now insurgent alienable rights.
Are they inalienable rights?
But no, well, all rights, all who now have certain rights.
Well, but we don't have to say that because you know our period of 1860 to 1970. And during in that period, they got to go
All we gotta go about doing what the system did. The system messed us up now.
Well, I don't know.
It ain't messed us up. No, it ain't messed us up. It's all right. We just gotta put some stuff in place.
Still figure out how to manipulate the land.
Well, first of all, when you get ready to manipulate something, you have to make it be the thing that you was doing is they had it. You know, we want to let you go to school with us.
We wanna control their mind.
We want to instill into them inferior. You have the right to that. You have to control the type of education that you receive.
Now, hold up. Have a law been passed that said we have to integrate the balance period? Or did integration come after 1970?
It came before 1954. Civil rights.
Surely the Brown was before. But they were legally, wait a minute. But they didn't legally, 1963 to 1963. So they had 17
Now,
I'm not saying in Holmes County, it was like 1977 before they legally integrated.
legal, they might not have enforced it then in 1960.
I'm talking about in
Okay, well,
They have the freedom of choice.
Yeah.
I mean, to have a law and not be enforced is useless.
Well, if you're not willing to die and fight for it,
Okay, so you would press
you know how you bring it about.
But what I'm saying, people might not see their children, but I was the first one when they did
No, what
in
we're telling you is,
1963 in Mississippi, and they truly integrated. That's when I went to
so
school.
instead of us just
I'm not
saying,
saying yes, some places.
I never choice.
so, you know.
Yeah, they had that freedom of choice.
So, okay, as long as they pass, they say, okay,
We're
integration.
still being subject,
Now we have
we're still being mistreated,
Yeah.
we're still being treated as we don't count,
Control.
we have no value.
Immigration
We're being
level
locked out of systems and then
of the students. See, it's not bad to integrate, but someone has to control the integration. See, and it's those who are in power are the ones who control the integration. So you might integrate, but then I'm gonna say, well, we can put 3 of them here, 10 of them over there, this one there, and give them a test, and make it difficult for them to qualify to be on the level, you know, when they really should be tired.
But
And keep them back and make it difficult, you know, for the parents of those children to attend school, so that they have to be working instead of coming to school. And that way, they don't do advancing in the system as the white did. You'll have one at 18 years old, and he might be in the 7th grade.
Well, I guess those are strategies.
And we have to,
Okay. So you're gonna make it, you're gonna make sure the parents are working.
Well, what I would say is we have to make sure we control the level of integration
So how we gonna do that?
by doing the things we got to do.
What I'm saying, some of that is best.
control the education.
Yeah. Take a look at it.
But now, when you say control the curriculum, you still got white kids, or you want your kids to take the test, and if the black kids are in the room with them, what are you saying you don't do?
You don't teach it.
See, you give them teachers.
I speak because I was there.
How they
What they gave. When they first integrated to school, they put me there. And it was a horrible night. The first thing that the white people did was they made you feel inferior. They made you feel inferior. At that time, we weren't wearing these cones. People got their hair pressed. The little white kids would come up and tell me, nigga, you got all that grease in your hair. Don't you touch me. Now, it wasn't but 4 or 5 of y'all there.
And what we can say that was they still fear. They still fear.
And it was more of them.
So
They made you feel less than them. Because you looked at your nappy hair and you looked at they pretty straight hair. And then, you know, you wanted your hair to be pretty too. And see, they made you feel your hair was wrong.
instead of being concerned about learning, concerned about survival. So in that case, it's very difficult for you to achieve
They mess with your
at the
mind.
same level.
So you put sex in a hostile environment. You put it in a hostile environment.
Yeah, mess with your self-esteem. Mess with your lower your self-esteem.
That's what I'm creating, a hostile environment for African American children. That's in the school, create a hostile environment. And the fun of that is you can put instill and lower, instill fear.
They lowered your self-esteem.
Make them feel inferior and you know, hostile environment for African Americans too.
And it works today.
And I got another one too, another strategy. We make sure we classify law, everybody's good education too. Then we can separate them niggas from our children. Put them in a whole new classroom and make sure we get them.
That's what I'm saying, inferiority. So they can be inferior to white.
They can handle that.
Teach them that not to be, teach them that they are.
Teach them that they are inferior to white.
And so we'll free them up for that.
Teach them to marry
If
the
they
inferior to
let
white.
us, we put our sons back together again. So that's
Inferior to white.
what we see. And that's all. Well, we can't take it right to the but we will get it.
And they had a way of, you know, if they want to stay on the area, but they had a way of making sure like you were dumb, you didn't allow.
We're gonna classify them all as special ed. That way we can get them out the classroom all together without killing one of them. Because they already behind, slow and inferior. So we're gonna put them over there and we're gonna have some of our white teachers to teach them. We're gonna make sure they don't teach them nothing.
Let me ask y'all a question. Y'all give me anything from your other
Community, yeah, we've been trying. The truth is, we tried. Now, you had to get them, and we tried to get them answers why they wouldn't really participate. We tried that for the last 2 days.
Another way to change the perspective on it.
you put our students in one class, don't put them, make our black students stay in one class, and you give them like class with the rest of the school.
But I think
That's how we're gonna classify them.
under special education.
That's how we're gonna separate them out the room. But that falls under that. You can separate from the rest of them.
Don't teach them about their culture, teach them about like they have black history. Teach them black history. Yeah. Like I do have. Let's teach them white. Don't teach them nothing anything about that.
Right, so that's a, you know, we're destroying can't go to town.
Make them believe that they get and so don't get that, don't put it in identity.
There you go. You don't want to say that at all. So that means I'm
They're being true, transportation.
As a matter of fact, I'm not even going
In a way that they don't take the initiative and say, listen, do whatever
we say. As a matter of fact,
They still can follow, they can find that inferior thing, because he is the inferior class anyway. That means they, you know, not to initiate, take charge of things, supposed to follow this message to one.
So we're talking about teaching them to be obedient to us and to take their lead from us, whatever we say, it's all right.
So we gotta be educated, but we don't have to really tell the obedience.
is, if all you got to do is be white to be a leader. If you white, you right. So you white, you lead no matter what your status is. If you black, you just got to be white and you right. So what they were doing was teaching blacks to be obedient to whites because whites are the leaders. They are the right.
Oh, they had was too.
Okay. I guess I see it as separate the way she's writing up. I see it when you say teach them to be obedient to white, so a leader, you putting white in two categories. There's white.
They're saying that white period are leaders. All whites are black folk leaders.
A little
Well,
too.
maybe you said teach them that all whites are leaders and they should be obedient. But I mean, I got it. That doesn't read clear.
Teach them to be obedient to whites who are leaders.
When you read it like that, it's like she's separating whites, like all whites not leaders.
Yeah.
Some whites are leaders, and they're considered to be leaders, and they're considered others are not considered leaders. That's all I'm saying. See what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Either you're going to teach them to be obedient to whites, that's all of them. Right. Right. Other way I'm saying was just unclear. You want to get out the essence of what you were trying to say.
As long as you white, you can recognize it.
Right.
He's your authority. I can give you the whole whatever. You have to get on your bed. They go in the door.
Sam and
You can respect our rights.
But let's control the respect our rights. And make sure that that goes in that house and mama, they don't want to have. Right? That's right. We give us a little bit. And if we got daddy up in that house,
I guess this will fall up under this. It's still something that I just like to see on it. They always told me that you have to say yes, no, to white people, all white, respect. Yes, ma'am. No, and even to white children, you said,
On the other page, did we put instill fear in it as part of our strategy?
No, we didn't put it.
Yeah, we said it, but we put it. Yeah, put that up too. Not really.
and
Somewhere it's a separate one. Instill fear.
And now we want to start inflicting more physical pain on Negroes too. We want more physical pain. What is why people trying to scare you? They're trying to scare you or put fear.
but how do we create this plan?
When you teach them to get in the show, it seems like the show.
Setting them up to fail. Setting students up to fail.
Oh, so you want to make sure the scholar control what you know what you done? No, we're not going to make it. So how do you expect them to keep these colors?
Now, I know this why they're doing it.
Right, you didn't have restaurants, because now they can walk and talk without.
Okay, well, I slavery right. Second bad. Still not slavery, but still like segregation.
Well, somewhere during the time in Black period, they still passed a law that said separate, but when they came out, it was 52, it was a reference to 54, because they
Okay, so it is now.
so then it was back to court, somewhere later, you could be separate, but you had to
I can remember this.
now when they like you around the corner, it beats down.
By ice cream. And what they would do, you didn't have to come on this side. You could buy get your ice cream. And the whites would come on this side. Another thing they would throw your money. Like it go, but no, they didn't want you to throw their money. And they looked at it. And then if I do this enough, then you're going to stop coming in here. Oh, we're hoping that you'll stop coming in.
And if you come to our place, we can make sure you have a sit to the back.
Right. And you can use this bag.
We will make sure that we have it right there. You got to come back some type of contact. One of us started in public.
And I'm the chair. You don't want to work up. You don't want to pay them. You don't want to work.
In other words, they treat blacks like second class.
That was forbidden by
You want to pay them.
membership and everything.
just making another question. Oh, you got said high school.
I got set high school, and they gonna still.
Also, put it
Like 95. Shooting house, burning house, lynching, house burning.
They got banned.
put Bruce
Banks. Yeah, banks and things. Because it wasn't white.
Yeah.
You couldn't, bank, we ain't gonna sell them no land.
Qualification out of that
Yeah,
region.
right, you go to the bank, it's good to borrow some money, to buy you some land, to build a house.
we're gonna make sure that they're not able to borrow money.
And I've been trying to say this, and we're gonna still set them all and kill them.
We're gonna still kill them. We're gonna make sure. You gotta write it where people understand it clearly. Or we gonna have to remember to say it. Like you gotta know. Make sure they can't borrow money. Make sure they can't borrow money. Can't buy land. We're gonna network all our new white folks over in this town. You know what I'm saying? And we still gonna
Control that community and see that they're gonna become organized.
we're gonna control that community.
Put gatekeepers like here.
No, we're gonna control that community. We're gonna control community. We're gonna make a sample and say we're gonna control. You ain't got to make a note. So we're gonna control that community to make sure they don't organize. Don't be having me, they have me gonna shoot up in there.
And we're gonna get
It's gonna be a
snitches.
random.
What they did do that. They got snitches, keep not reaching jail.
It'll be
Control
random.
that
They still shoot in churches.
Okay, now you have to control, we said, okay, since we're gonna control their community by controlling it. By controlling it, I ain't doing, but controlling it to make sure, you keep it control. To make sure they can't organize. To make sure that they don't organize, don't be holding on meetings. And if we see some meetings, we gonna, shoot up in there and throw fireballs.
Try to organize.
Right.
Discourage others.
Yeah, those who try to organize, we're gonna shoot or throw firebombs in the place and hold their meeting to make examples out of what happens if you get caught trying to hold a meeting.
And they last new black people will be if you black and you move to town, they fight. Because they think you're right.
What we have done.
Throwing firebombs.
You know, my stepfather got killed for being new to town.
In the place where it is. In the place where it is.
And he worked, and they, but he had something. And they opened up school with him and told him he was drinking and took him to jail.
We're gonna burn some of the
I tell you another thing.
We're gonna burn some of the church.
Almost school busted. And the next morning, my mom picked him up and he told me, white kids are going to school, black kids are going to same. Well, they go together. The black kids are about to let the white kids and make another line.
Make another line, we got burn churches too. Separate, yeah.
You know,
Black kids are the right black
Kids in the back.
right now, unfortunately,
I don't think we got it like that. That's for the community.
a lot of
Still,
people
we said black kids.
beat because they were in the middle of this. A lot of people said, well, my son, he left home. He had to come back. He must have run away. Picture right out there in the back.
You know another story, we gonna make sure those niggas don't go on the legislation. We gotta make sure. We gotta make sure.
Well, we got that already, organized.
Well, we gonna be clear. Organization, they might be organizing just to do something or to get something. We gonna make sure them funds know what organization. Organization is power, but they are organization. You know what I'm saying?
Not only that they're doing all that, we're going to start. We have already organized.
Yeah, we waiting to see now.
part of all
Right now, they do stuff that they got all in her school. They teach us like what?
I'm gonna tell you what y'all forget. We're gonna put drugs in their community.
Oh, yeah.
Drugs back in Mississippi, baby, not in Mississippi, baby.
We gonna plant drugs. We gotta talk about because if we put it
That's the
on,
best.
that's a big deal.
While they was sitting there, while they were playing,
Plant drugs, we don't have money. They go to this,
back in the 1970s. Marijuana was the highest. But it's still, yeah, it won't kill you, but it's still, use it on an everyday basis. You got to know.
Understand now.
And see,
It's a natural word. You don't base it with any.
that there are arguments against that. But you know what? There are arguments against that. I'm going from a medical standpoint. There are arguments against that. There are arguments against that. But you know what? Arguments against that. I'm a strong believer that if you use marijuana every day, 7 days out of the week, I'm strongly believe that it's going to mess with your mind.
Look, we don't want to.
Yeah, but you better research both sides.
If you don't make it, you don't mix it with something
That's one side of that story. That's one side of it.
mushroom.
That's one side of it. My uncle is at done. Let me tell you something. I understand what you say. My uncle right now is a medical doctor that is in the research has been for 15 years with marijuana. They have statistics. Yes, they have. But I'm telling you, it's a flip thing. You know, and I'm gonna tell you something else. He has said much of it has to do with your immune system. See, some people.
Wait.
You gotta do your own stuff under the individual. I'm saying it's the natural plant.
All right. What we
They use it for medicine. In some cases, they use it for medicine.
illegal drugs. We don't want, if we want to, we want
It was illegal. Marijuana is
You got we can
we don't have to. We don't want to be in there with them. They're working in the farm.
jeopardize others. I got a free and I was just in the state. I had a free. Not what we were. That's what they just was gone. They won't be able to do anything. But they're not going to expose them to anything. She'll drop something.
Treat them, make something to eat that you like.
Okay, we're gonna introduce them to gang bang. We're gonna introduce them to gang bang.
I was paying you 10 cents a day, but I can't pay you 10 cents a day no more. I can pay you
We can also get, let's say, we go back to the hump. It could be that maybe there was a black man that maybe would take your money, maybe he might get 2 or 3 cents. That's better than nothing.
But look what he said, during that time, even coming back to that time, we didn't have no jobs or whatever because the blacks didn't have the job to give you a job. So we've got to go to Mr. Someone.
She asked me what the hell in my head.
Question was, what did they do after they got sick? Did they have to move out the plantation?
Come on, yeah. And they had children to work, they ain't got no.
Some of them did, yeah.
Some of them did have to move off of the plantation, and
They
then
didn't have
if
no-
they
they didn't have no
children,
hands.
especially the males, they would put them to work.
Women had to have children. They had to. Men had to bear whatever they did.
That women had to do what?
They had to have children.
That was someone.
Yeah, but if it was the man on doing the work, what they would actually do then was if they got sick, they did put some of them off, but if those male was able to work, they put those male out in the field to do the work. Yeah.
Meantime, that individual will always be catered to us in the meantime.
That's why we're gonna promise them something. You can put
Okay. We have. So I need. Oh, we go out.
yeah.
That's easy. That's easy. That's easy. Your nieces. That's easy.
What up? You talked about destroying your pride.
Let's talk about the program to work for little stuff that blocks in their way of voting. How we gonna do this? Let's say our program will work for putting stuff that blocks in their way for voting. How do we do that? Putting stuff that blocks in their way to keep them from exercising their right to vote. You know they gave them their right to vote. We can't take that back. We decided we're gonna put stuff that blocks in their way.
You gonna be tired? Seven.
Look, if you let them, then your work gonna be hard. They need to expose you, right? You want to do that? No, they don't need to be exposed. If we don't let them do it, if they work hard, then you keep them going. Listen, we got to be interested. So now they go to the polls. They won't go to the polls.
We got one somebody that's gonna go in the booth with them to make sure that they go right. That's how we know they can't be in. That's right. So we gonna go in and get No, we're not talking about running for office. We're voting for white folks. That's right, we're not talking about running for office. What I'm saying is, white people catch black people up there. No, we're just talking about, we're not talking about candidate. White people and candidate. What I'm saying, I understand what you're saying. But before this time, black people didn't look off. He's qualified. They couldn't do it. But we're not talking about it. But see, that happened. The white people stopped living doing that. That happened before the 60s. We started out with back in the 18th something to 1970. That took place in the 70s. I think one of the criteria that you had to be able to read. One of the things that you had to be able to read, so they can't qualify, they can't read.
And I tell you what else we set them off to fight war. We had, we sent them in wars to do dirty duty. But World War II, a couple wars, we would send them off to do dirty duty. But in the war. Well, back then you didn't have to like a war.
They was drafting them back then.
Yeah,
That's what they was doing.
they had to go and do the dirty duty.
I gotta go back to the room and check on them.
They put them on the front line.
Like, what they doing today? In the room?
They don't say that.
I mean, you know, I can't stop at what happened on VA.
I said, you're right. But during this time, at some point, close to in the 50s, in World War, well, see, they had the airmen, what you call it? Yeah, my STs, they don't like you. But anyway, so they had them, that was the what? Whatever, more than 40. You know what I'm saying? So, but even prior to that, they had infantry during the Civil War. In the war. In the Civil War. Hell, they was even in the what you call this thing? The first war with Colony.
And don't forget about England. Don't forget about if you had another manufacturing of power.
Oh yeah. You heard that?
Another thing, if you are a good worker, and if you were in the main
Muhammad Ali.
but that can keep you from going. The plantation on keep you from going. They have to know. Yeah, we drive track.
They set up laws. Yeah, they set up laws. I needed more.
More than I was.
Yeah. You got to
jail, got about 70 other people. You go to army, got chained.
So that's about where we were in the 70s, after the Vietnam War and stuff. No, because you know what? Now hold up. Yeah, she had it. And she what? What did it? Is she from? Let me see. She graduated. She had at least be 68. And then scratch their head. You got you on camera saying you mind the church. I was in South Carolina.
You in South Carolina ain't birthday. Right.
Burnt crosses in the yard.
We did bombing.
Jordan.
Crosses burnt in the yard.
Yeah, and we also we execute too. Kill.
Man, you just incriminating.
What you call that? What you call it? What it is? Murder. How did Kennedy die? How did Martin Luther King die? Assassination.
You said you had
Somebody else.